All right. Have you ever heard of quiet quitting? It's become pretty common since the pandemic. People have been working from home. They have their meeting on one screen, and then their second screen could be something else. It could be social media. They could be starting a new hobby. Some people have even started a whole new business while they've been employed full time. Well, no one has done quiet quitting better than James Monroe. James Monroe is from the UK. But James Monroe worked as an account manager by day at a corporation. And meanwhile, he had this other personality, this bigger than life flamboyant personality. He was a race car driver in the UK. He called himself the gentleman racer. And, there's nothing wrong with living a fantasy, except he funded this race car fantasy by embezzling money from his employers. Yeah, let's get into it. So, when James Cox was his pseudonym, like all teenage boys, Monroe, he wanted to be a race car driver. He loved cars. He had Lamborghini posters in his bedroom, Ferrari posters. I mean, it's every boy's dream, except it's really expensive to make it into the racing career. This is a guy that was driving around a Golf GTI, which is a cool car, but the dream of being a race car driver was really a stretch. But by his 30s, he was working in a corporate office in the suburbs, and he's just bored out of his mind, like a lot of people who work white-collar jobs. And so he would drive to these exotic car showrooms, and one day he purchased a Ferrari. And so it says here that Monroe actually started racing these Ferraris in Ferrari challenges. He ended up buying an even faster, more expensive Ferrari, even though, by all accounts, this guy had no talent on the track. But this is where it gets really interesting, because then Monroe buys a McLaren F1 GTR, and he entered into this high-profile GTR championship, despite the fact that he was outclassed in every race that he's ever raced. He even had a supermodel unveil his McLaren. But again, this guy was a terrible race car driver, and his co-drivers had to pick up the slack for his lack of skills. So you got to ask yourself, obviously, this had to raise suspicions, right? Not only in the racing world, but wouldn't somebody recognize him? Well, luckily he used a pseudonym, right? But eventually, a senior executive at his company found out that Monroe was racing while watching him on TV. And the company did a little digging, and in their audit, they found tons of fraud. Apparently, he paid for his $1 million car by creating fake companies and embezzling his company's money into these companies so that he could pay for his racing and his crazy lifestyle. Eventually, Monroe was convicted and imprisoned for his crimes, and the court details, they just paint this picture of this extravagant lifestyle which was nothing like this mundane, boring corporate life that everybody thought he lived. Everyone was a loser in this story. Not only did Monroe go to jail and he just tarnished his reputation, his company lost a lot of money too. But that wasn't the last time we heard from Monroe, because after he left prison, he actually faked his resume so he could try to get a high-paying job. And once he got that job, he embezzled funds from that company too. Monroe was sent back to prison, and he never learned his lesson, I guess. I wish I had more details about the story, because James Monroe's life is a classic pretend story. But you know what? I come across all these stories all the time, these very interesting stories that I just don't have enough information to make into a full episode. That doesn't mean that they won't become a full episode. That means that it's on my list, and I occasionally keep going at it until I have enough for a full episode. So I thought, why keep all this to myself? Because my list of stories that don't make it on the podcast are equally as fascinating. So it's almost like I have my own little private podcast that I keep to myself. And I was like, wait a minute, I should tell my audience about this story. So I'm going to attempt to release these little mini episodes so that you could enjoy. And it's almost like behind the scenes. So thank you, B. Hers, which is one of my listeners, for telling me about James Monroe. If you have a great pretend story, a story about deception, a story about someone pretending to be someone else, or a con artist, send it my way. It might make it into one of these little mini episodes. You never know.